Welcome back to the Commerce Collective podcast brought to you by Flywheel. You're listening to This Month Above the Fold, a monthly series on the Commerce Collective feed where Patrick Miller, co-founder of Flywheel, covers the most important commerce topics each month, and this is your March 2025 episode. I'm Emma Irwin, brand marketing manager at Flywheel and host of the podcast. Today, we are talking about an exciting new product launch from Flywheel, and then we're going to conceptualize the impact of this launch. Then we'll talk a bit about the state of retail media network efficacy and how that's impacting JBPs. And last, we'll cover what to do in terms of making sure your ad dollars are being spent on human eyes or even Gen AI eyes, but not wasted on bots. Let's get into it. Patrick, how are you? We were just talking about spring, but how you doing? How was your month of March?
It was good. We got daffodils up here, so I'm happy. It's almost warm. And no complaints. Everything, all is well.
It's the simple stuff in life.
Yeah.
All right. Daffodils.
Yeah, we ride the bike to school every day, and the boys are like, yellow flowers, yellow flowers. So like, what type of flower? And they, try to pronounce daffodil, and it gives me amusement.
Of course. Wait until you come across the chrysanthemums.
I can't pronounce that. I can't spell it. I can't pronounce it. I'm like, mums.
Yep, pretty much. I'm jumping in to surprise you with a new segment of our Above the Fold episodes. Each month, you're now going to get a quick briefing from our Retail Insights team. If you didn't know, we have a whole team of people who track industry trends, compile that research, all to help you prepare for the future. The Retail Insight team's latest research just dropped, which is their Amazon forecast. This report is available to Retail Insight subscribers, and if you're not convinced that you should be a Retail Insight subscriber, here are some hints from the report that you're just missing out on. First up, we are projecting Amazon to be a $1 trillion retailer globally by 2029. That's real huge, and that's not far away. The US will remain Amazon's largest market by far, but India and Australia are quickly growing markets to watch. In fact, India is forecasted to match the size of the UK by 2029, making it one of Amazon's 5 largest markets before the decade is over. And on Australia, stay tuned to the podcast feed because we've got something cooking there coming out soon. We are also forecasting that third-party sales will continue to outperform first-party sales and are expected to account for 80% of Amazon global sales added over the next 5 years. As a 1P vendor, you need to prepare for that. And when you add all this growth up, it means Amazon will continue to be one of the most influential retailers in the world. It will be the second largest retailer of health and beauty sales globally, and perhaps even more surprisingly, it will be the third largest retailer by food and beverage sales. It's a good thing this whole podcast is dedicated to helping you understand what it takes to win in commerce. All right, we're heading back to Patrick, but stay tuned for more retail insights in our next Above the Fold episode. First up, we are talking about Flywheel's AMC Audiences for sponsored ads. These are pre-built audiences that our team created that advertisers can use to guide shoppers along a journey that increases that customer long-term value over time, turning new-to-brand shoppers into product lovers and then brand loyalists by marketing to them with personalized messaging at scale. That's our product. It simplifies putting purchase and behavioral data to work for your campaigns at the user level. If you're listening and you want to use these right this second, you should reach out to us. All right. Bigger picture, we talked about AMC Audiences for sponsored ads right when Amazon launched the capability. Can you remind the audience of how this has really elevated an advertiser's ability to reach shoppers with precision throughout the path to purchase?
Sure. So for the last decade, the two atoms that we've had to work with are a customer search query and an ASIN. And those are great. It was really fun. But the thing that types in the customer search query is a customer. And now we have the ability to work with the atoms that are the customer ID, sort of within a privacy safe environment. So, we're sort of querying and building in aggregate and never, having to touch PII. And so what becomes interesting is if I'm looking for protein powder, great. I typed in the term protein powder. But if I'm a brand and I've never bought brand of protein powder, well, I'd be willing to pay more for that because it is a new to brand. And so, so what the AMC audiences allow us to do is take, constructs that we have built around the DSP and then import them into the AMS, into sponsored ads, and then use that as a bid modifier. So we can then say hey, we have our traditional campaigns that we're running, And, how do we then use those bid modifiers to then go after customers that we find more valuable, which then allows us to then bridge, back to the DSP. And so in many ways, like this is the start of sort of an audience first, strategy. And we start becoming a little bit more agnostic as to the medium and much more focused on the customer and then being able to measure that deterministically.
And I'm thinking about, I know share of voice has been this KPI forever and ever. And we've been talking, you and Gabe have been talking a long time about kind of shifting away from that. But with, as you mentioned, and this is your phrasing, not mine, audience as the new keyword, how does that impact what the key metrics that brands should be looking for or advertisers should be looking for are?
Sure. Well, it depends. And so share of voice is a great metric, but it works especially well on low cognitive load categories that are clicky, not scrolly. And so, if I'm selling FMCG, high conversion rate, SFE is a great one, and you're still going to want to pay attention to it. However, in categories, like apparel, the customers are going to, look at multiple ASINs. And so, share of voice doesn't matter as much. And so what matters a lot more is, who is the customer? And that's also true for FMCG. And so this then sort of starts to bridge and allows us to sort of look at the uniqueness of each brand and figure out sort of what are the metrics that we care most about. And so some of them are going to be, hey, how do I shift away from price promo and get towards, more durable relationships with customers? Others are going to be, hey, how do I get net new customers? Or it's going to say, hey, I want to make sure that, I'm getting customers that have the ability to purchase my more premium product, which is then going to allow me to bridge to more profit. And so at the end of the day, brands care about three things. They care about, top line growth, they care about share, and they care about profit. And you can't have all the things all the time, but you can try to. And so, for us, it allows us to dig into more and understand what a brand is trying to achieve across the various classes of trade, and then build out a marketing strategy that allows them to achieve that.
Got it. I want to bring us back to CID because we've been talking about CID for a while and we talk about it a lot because it's really important, right? But I feel like we only talk about it when it comes to the lens of Amazon, because I believe Amazon's really the only one that lets us see it and work with it in the environment of AMC. Why is that? Why has Amazon taken the step to give advertisers kind of that transparency to protected identity, but behavioral data?
I mean, look, this is the thesis of D2C brands a decade ago and having a one-to-one relationship with the customer, but at scale. And so, most D2C brands, they tend to top out revenue-wise, and then they then sort of move into traditional retail because they want the additional growth. But the thesis of, hey, how do I build enduring relationships with customers is the correct one. Now, that said, I don't want the toilet paper company emailing me. So it's a little bit of just helping brands see that retailers are a critical partner here in order to reach the customer in a way that the customer, wants to learn about a product. And so this then allows, sort of the CID in general allows us to sort of build campaigns that way. And I would expect to sort of, as we go forward, that, more and more retailers are going to expose something similar. And then, and then we can then sort of build on it. But it's sort of moving from pure deterministic audiences, it gets to a, sort of more probabilistic audiences, and then allows us to then measure deterministically, which is, I think, ultimately the key. And, look, the retailers have the ultimate seed data because they have the purchase history and the click history and the view history. And so that is, sort of gives us then the ability to create these seed audiences, scale them via lookalikes, and then measure the efficacy deterministically. And that all comes back to having the CID.
Got it. And my last question on this one is, I've been thinking about how a lot of the narrative that I've seen, not just with our own launch of our AMC Audiences for sponsored ads, but the entire capability extension from Amazon, is that everyone is talking about how this allows you to really hit with precision throughout the entire funnel. But then there's also the flip side discourse of the entire funnel is collapsing. There is no funnel. And I'm curious what your take is there in terms of how advertisers actually use these audiences where path to purchases aren't really clear. I'm one of these people. I'll see something on TikTok and buy it within 30 seconds, even though I've never actually touched it before. But what's the balance there?
So the funnel is a graphical representation of a count of customers by stage, by what the customer has done. And when you visualize it, it typically looks like an inverted triangle, i.e. the funnel. That does not mean that every single, customer is going linearly down that funnel. Sometimes it's cylinders. And so, our data science team has built out a way to sort of look at, funnel stages and propagation rates. And so looking at sort of count of customers, how long are they dwelling at various stages of the funnel, and then who is churning, who is moving further down or getting closer to purchase or to loyalty, so that we can then activate audiences at scale across those cohorts to help sort of move them to the end state that we're looking for. So yes, it is a funnel graphically, but oftentimes it's a collection of cylinders.
I like that. I like that visual collection of cylinders. All right, we'll move into the next one, which I feel like ties quite nicely to what we were just talking about in terms of you talking like retailers have the ultimate seed data and everything. But we're going to cover an article that came out from Digiday that they are essentially highlighting that a lot of brands are pulling back on their JBP commitments in regards to retail media spend. I know that your take is that this is about retail media network efficacy and JBPs are just the output. But are brands outsmarting JBPs? And is this the year that brands really take a stand on which networks they're willing to invest in, moving beyond a test them all approach?
Yeah, first, I found it frustrating that people were running to the press and being quoted anonymously. Good for Digiday for getting the article, but to me, this should be between the brands, the partners, and the retailers, and not litigated through the press. Now that said, brands are concurrently sort of selling to the retailers and then also then buying from the retailers. So they're selling their goods, they're buying the media. And so oftentimes there are, and the retailers, want certainty around commitments of spend, and the brands want commitment around expectations around sell-through. And so there's, lots of different constructs and sort of how brands and retailers work together. And a JBP is one of them. And it is a very good construct around commitments to create value together. And so in my mind, these things are very good things, but both parties have to deliver on their commitments. And so when I hear that, folks are saying, hey, we don't want to do a JBP, typically that means that one party feels like they are not benefiting, from the commitment. And so it's sort of like, okay, well, why is that? What has to change? And I think that's really sort of the solve here is for the retailers, it is understanding, why is the brand buying the media, and then vice versa. And, what does the brand want from the media? How does the brand compare it to other types of media? And then what is sort of the ultimate determination of, hey, did it work or not? And so to me, this is a sort of emblematic of just brands and retailers figure it out and then create a construct where both parties are creating value. Doesn't mean there's not going to be disagreement. That's okay. But I do think that it is a little bit of sort of just an empathy exercise of what does joint value creation actually look like here.
For sure. When I saw this article come through, and it's they got 3 quotes, I think, from 3 different people. And I was like, all right, this is a little bit of a hype piece, and not clickbait, but a little bit of a hype piece.
Well, it's somebody floating something that they wanted in the press, and if it was somebody from Flywheel that was talking to them, I'd kill them. To me, it's no, it's just wholly inappropriate in my mind.
We're trained better than that. We would never.
No, but but it's okay, if a brand, is saying, hey, I'm going to give you these extra dollars, I want more trucks showing up at my dock. That is perfectly reasonable. And so if the trucks don't show up, well, then you don't get the dollars. So we're not talking complicated math here. But that all said, we're in a challenging macroeconomic environment. There's a lot of uncertainty. We're seeing, customers pull back, especially on discretionary items. And so, this is not necessarily purely on the retailer. But, if they made a commitment that they said they could do something and then they didn't deliver, I get it.
For sure. What do you do when you're frustrated? You go tell somebody that you're frustrated. And
no, you don't. You call up the party and you work it out.
That's better advice. You're right. My last question on this one, though, I've been thinking about say I'm an advertiser and I work across we'll call it 4 major retail media networks. And let's say some of them are driving the results that I want to see, some of them are not. But what if the majority of my shoppers are within one of these retailers that isn't driving the kind of ad return that I'm looking for? How would you kind of guide them through that and trying to figure out what the push and pull of where the audience is versus where the results that you're looking for are?
Yeah, I think first is starting with what am I trying to achieve and why is it working on one platform but not another? And how do I help inform the retailer of, look, I'm finding success, here or there. I'm not finding success here. Well, what's different? And then sometimes it's a matter of tooling and what are the various, sort of levers and knobs that the brands, can flip and turn. And sometimes it's a matter of sort of, what is the business strategy? And so like, I think it's interesting if I compare, like if it's a marketplace, I have unlimited selection. Selection is the ultimate growth lever because you can just add more SKUs and you're going to sell more things. If it's click and collect, you're going to be constrained because, you're picking off the shelves. But there are alternate paths. And I think like Costco is a really interesting one where you are, you sort of have the core member experience, within the warehouse, which is great. But, you also can buy through Instacart. You can also go to Costco.com and find selection that you can't find, in the warehouse, especially around big and bulky. And then you also have sort of a B2B experience. And each one of them is different. And it's very transparent to the members of sort of how is like the price architecture different on each of them as a function of sort of what is the convenience. And so, so like there's all these different ways that if I'm a brand, I can help grow with Costco, but I have to sort of acknowledge sort of the uniqueness of these 4 sort of entrance points to Costco, and then figure out sort of what is then my strategy, to drive each of them in a way that ultimately, helps me achieve my objectives as a brand.
Understood. Okay. Number 3, this is the one from the Wall Street Journal. And essentially, it's calling out that the companies who claim to weed out fake users for advertisers are not hitting that mark. Of course, the companies mentioned in here say that that's a misleading statement. This was some tea dropped early on a Friday morning, but this entire issue, like obviously not going away. In fact, it's probably more prevalent now than ever because we also have Gen AI around scraping the internet, actually trying to find information for users on top of these bots, on top of also I learned about scammer bots in here and all of that as well. I was like, oh my gosh, so much is going on. But I'm curious, what's your take on all of this and like the actual differentiation of bot versus Gen AI and how anyone even deals with this?
Yeah, I think a lot of the conversation is a little bit of a distraction in the sense that like, yeah, there's bots everywhere. There've always been bots. There always will be bots. And like, there's a different flavor of bots. And some of them are just, little crawlers, looking to build the Wayback Machine. Some of them are Gen AI looking to build a training set. And, sometimes it's, et cetera, et cetera. And so one of the things that we see is publishers, i.e., sometimes retailers, are getting smarter and smarter about making it difficult for bots to go onto their sites because they have an economic self-interest here. And so if you look at the sites in China, and it's like they're gotten really, really hard to scrape. And so, it's like, because they see that they do not want people taking their data. Same thing with Amazon. If you look at the ratings and reviews, really, really hard to scrape because it's super, super valuable. And so, it is in their economic best interest to block the bots. Now, if I'm your everyday publisher and I'm trading on a CPM basis, like, well, I'm going to get more money if the brand thinks that, that there's all this traffic and because I'm trading on a CPM basis. And so then the question is like, what's the check? Is the check these third-party tools that are supposed to, sort of block the bots or detect the bots or whatever? But that's a constant game of cat and mouse, and it will never end because of the various economic incentives that are out there. And so to me, like the solve is actually closed loop deterministic measurement. And so if I can then look at the various publishers and which of those is actually performant and see it, sort of down to, a customer level, well, I can say like, well, I'm going to put more money into that publisher and less money into that publisher. And guess what happens when you stop putting money into a publisher? They try to fix the problem. Right now, like they're like, I'm getting more traffic. This is great. Look at me. But like, as we've seen in China, as we've seen with the retailers, they real quickly, when they start losing money because of the traffic, too much traffic or the wrong traffic, they clamp it down. And so to me, this whole thing is actually sort of the wrong solve around these third-party tools. And it's how do we create incentives for the publishers to block the bots? And it can be done. It is being done. I know that they're constrained, revenue-wise right now because of the LLMs, but like they got to do it if they want to stay in business. And so they got to figure it out. And the advertisers need to use deterministic measurement to see which of the publishers are performant, which are not, shift your dollars away to the ones that are just bot farms.
Bot farms, yeah. For using deterministic measurement, I feel like we've talked about this before, but for anyone who's listening and like is just brand new here, I know there are people, I've run into them in the office that are like, oh my gosh, we do a podcast? I'm like, oh, 3 years of it, yeah. But for deterministic measurement, like can you be doing deterministic measurement across retailers that don't provide a clean room for you to really have that kind of one-to-one, really precise look.
Sometimes. I mean, so this is where it's like worth digging in with the retailers of like, where do they have perfect identity resolution and where do they have estimations? And if it is, and that's okay. Like, you know, if I look at like Kroger, yeah, lots of people use a Kroger card and they've got really good identity resolution of the people that use the Kroger card, but some people don't. And some people pay cash and some people use Snap. And so that's okay. But the onus is on the retailer to explain to the brands of where are they making assumptions, where are they modeling, and being very transparent as far as to give the brand context to understand, like, is this investment great or not? For the platforms that do have perfect identity resolution, to me, it's like you use that to gauge the performance of the various publishers. So if I have a retailer that has perfect identity resolution and I can look across all these different sites and I can see like the performance variance of those, and granted it will vary by, you know, brand to brand, but then I would then use that, you know, insight to then inform sort of where I then prioritize across other RMNs.
Got it. All right. The last thing I want to call it is my favorite quote from this piece, which was a professor saying, "Can you tell the difference between a person and a person-shaped sock puppet holding up a sign that says, 'I'm a person'?" And I was drinking coffee when I read that, and I was like,
I was like, the good old academic humor. No, but they're right. It's pointing to the, like, everybody's fighting the wrong fight here, and it's like there's simpler solutions. Like they're over baking this, and these solutions, you know, were invented a decade plus ago, before you had, for large brands, before you had the ability to measure deterministically. And so it's just like, and it's not that they don't have a place. I'm sure they do. I just think it's the wrong solve.
For sure. All right. I think that wraps us up.
Yeah,
Absolutely nailed it. Oh, beautiful. Thank you as always for your time.
All right. Great to see you.
And that's it for this month's e-commerce news. Join us next month for our recap of what happened and what's interesting in commerce, plus insights from our new Retail Insights briefing segment. I'm Emma Irwin, and I will see you next time.